Welcome back. We're talking about the civil war in Yemen that has left thousands of people dead, tens of thousands injured, and millions facing a humanitarian crisis. Still with us, Sama'a Al-Hamdani is a Yemen analyst and blogger. Khaled Al-Batarfi is a Saudi journalist, and Mohammad Marandi is a professor at the University of Tehran. Let's get back to our panel. Sama, the United Nations has come up with a peace plan to try and end this conflict, but there have been major protests against that plan from people who believe that it makes too many concessions to the rebels, and some who say that it even hands over power to the rebels.
Well, actually, if we look at the last proposed peace plan, it actually states a new transitional government, meaning that the current transitional president and his government would have to be replaced by a new president. Now, what's happening is actually the places where they're protesting this believe in President Hadi's legitimacy and want him to continue on as president. So you see these protests specifically in the city of Aden and Taiz, while the rest of the country is ready to take any peace deal possible. Now, the reason we haven't seen peace so far is because a lot of this fighting results in personal animosity between these political leaders. And a lot of people do not want to see President Hadi continue with what he's doing. First, because his transitional period was supposed to be 2 years. And then second, because he actually resigned when the Houthis took over the capital, then withdrew his resignation and said that it was stated by force. And then he fled to Oman, and from Oman he went to Riyadh. And then the war began, and ever since the war began, he's been operating mostly from the city of Riyadh. He continued to come back to Aden, and when he went back to Aden, he had several ISIS attempts on his life, went back to the city of Riyadh. And so the reason the UN is suggesting this is because this president has not proven himself capable of operating from within the country. And it seems that the rebels, even though they are rebels and have come from Sa'da, are clearly more in power on the ground and have more control than him, which means that now, moving forward, they're going to have to be part of a future consensus government. They're going to represent some form of the Yemeni population, since a significant number of people believe in their legitimacy. Now, the problem is, how do you convince everybody in the Middle East who don't know how to share power to share power together?
Okay. Khaled, what is the Saudi Arabian position on the UN peace plan? Is it acceptable to Saudi Arabia, or does it in some way form the basis of any kind of political or negotiated settlement?
Saudi Arabia and the Yemeni government have accepted all suggestions and all plans by the UN. The other side was the one who refused. Only the last one was accepted by the government, but they have objections to number 4 point, which is for the president to give his authorities to another deputy, not the same deputy they have today. By the way, when the president gave his resignation, he was under house arrest at the time, and the parliament did not accept that resignation. They refused the resignation. And then when he escaped to Aden, he withdrew his resignation. So according to the constitution, he was still the president, and that convinced the UN and the whole world, except for Iran.
Okay. Dr. Marandi, the Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif has called for a political solution to this crisis, to this conflict in Yemen, and he says that that solution should involve regional powers. What would Iran like to see in terms of coming to some kind of negotiated solution?
Well, at the end of the day, the priority for Iran is for this to be a Yemeni solution, where the groups inside Yemen work together and solve the problem. A major problem, of course, is that the Yemenis don't consider Mansour Hadi to be legitimate. As pointed out, he was only supposed to be a transitional president for 2 years. He overstayed that, and so he was no longer legitimate. And he was the only candidate in an election in the first place. And his resignation was not submitted under duress. He was not being beaten or tortured. But in any case, his 2 years were already over. So, and the problem really, the belief in Tehran is that the Saudis, through promoting their extremist ideology, Wahhabi ideology, which is the same as that of Boko Haram, the same as that of Al-Qaeda and Daesh, the tragedy that we saw the other day in Pakistan, where tens of Sufis were slaughtered at a shrine. This was done by Daesh, which has the same ideology that's promoted by the Saudi regime. It's hostile to any other religious belief other than Wahhabism. And this is one major problem. And as your guests in Saudi Arabia said, tried to make this a Persian Arab issue, which is ridiculous. The Zaydis are part of the Yemeni population. Saudi Arabia has a very long border with them, and they failed. And the Iranians are very far away from Yemen. And there's a siege which the Americans have been helping to enforce to starve the people of Yemen. So despite the siege, despite the fact that help cannot get into the country to even alleviate the suffering of ordinary people, we still see that the Saudis and their allies have failed in Yemen, and that's because they do not have popular legitimacy. They're just continuing to carry out slaughter. So the biggest problem is that these outside forces, like the Saudis, which have lost this war, they have to accept reality.
So there is one risk here. The BBC reported that militants from Al-Qaeda as well as from ISIL have taken advantage of the chaos in Yemen now to seize territory and to conduct attacks on government-controlled targets in Aden. What do you know about that?
Well, that's been happening ever since the start of the war. They actually took control of the governorate of Hadramaut first, and then they were able to operate in Aden. Aden is actually witnessing kind of guerrilla warfare style by the Islamic State that is operating between the city of Aden and Abyan. Now, what's important to note here is that the average Yemeni person would settle for any form of government as long as they provide them with the basics of life, meaning electricity, water, healthcare. And so far, the government has not been able to do that, which means that any local actor, a legitimate local actor, can do that, then they will pledge allegiance to them. And that's how the Houthis kind of came into the city of Sana'a. They came to protest subsidies, and they came by promising people that they will provide them with stable electricity, water, and these kind of means that the Yemeni people are seeking. Now, in the midst of this war, we have the entire country struggling to get that. So if the government was serious about its return to Yemen, about rebuilding the devastation that's taken place, then they should prioritize, especially in the city of Aden, where they've been free of Houthi militia and former President Saleh operatives on the ground for a long time. They should restore their electricity, provide them with security, facilitate just kind of regular operations, and rebuild the infrastructure there. And none of that has been happening because on the ground, again, the government is really weak and other militias have taken place.
Right, Khaled, what are the risks here, those risks that I pointed out a moment ago of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula as well as ISIL getting more of a foothold in Yemen because of this conflict?
Well, as long as they get the support, the full support from Iran, of course they will continue to be a threat to us and to the world. By the way, Osama bin Laden handwritten letters that were released recently showed that how much he has an alliance with Iran, and the New York also federal court proved that Iran were training those people who were attacking New York in 9/11, and that's why either Al-Qaeda and Daesh are attacking everyone in this region, especially Saudi Arabia and the world, but not ever Iran. And al-Baghdadi, when he was threatening and asking his people to attack Saudi Arabia, they never mentioned Iran or Israel. That shows you who is the real sponsor of terrorism. I'm sorry, I know the subject is Yemen, but you allowed him to go about talking about Wahhabism and religion and Zaydis
I think it's enough that
and I have the right to
explained his worldview.
Just Khaled, I'm running out of time. I just want to get Dr. Marandi's.
I think what he said, it really.
This is the only subject they are good at. They talk about Wahhabism to the end of any interview. I've been with Mr. Marandi many times.
Going back to what he was saying, I think it's quite clear.
Okay, one moment.
They are the sponsors.
One moment, you're both talking.
The program
they are their friends and allies. And we are
Dr. Marandi, we can't hear you. Both of you are talking. Dr. Marandi, go ahead.
He doesn't want me to respond. Yes, I think it's quite clear. Your viewers can judge for themselves whether ISIL or Al-Qaeda came from Iran or Saudi Arabia. We know what their ideology is. We know that the Saudis have created a menace that they cannot control. And this is, I think, is an important point. And that the Americans, the Saudis, and the Qataris, they created a monster in Libya. And then they use it in Syria. And they cannot control it. In Yemen, they tried to work with these extremists against Ansarullah, the Houthis, and they can't control it. And now this menace is spreading across the board. And the Saudis, who are completely incompetent, we see that alongside the border between Saudi Arabia and Yemen, they do not have the capability to defend themselves against the Yemeni forces that have now entered into Saudi Arabia. They continue to use these extremists because they are incompetent in fighting themselves. So what they do is they hire these extremist groups, they hire mercenaries, and then they do indiscriminate bombing from the air. And they think that this is how they're going to win the war, when in reality what they've done is they've discredited themselves completely. They've created a catastrophe in Yemen. They've created a catastrophe in Syria. And ultimately, the Saudi population is going to pay the price. We already see that the Saudi rial is under severe pressure. It is starting to move towards devaluation, most probably within a year, if the price of oil continues to be low. But I think it's also important for the international community to recognize that not only do they have to put pressure on the Saudis to stop these crimes, but also they have to stop the Saudis from spreading Wahhabism.